Well, it's interesting. I think you're nailing it. And I actually hate the term human in the loop um, for a bunch of reasons, but I do think it speaks to what you're talking about, and that is that when I find that right value equation, when I'm finding the right use case, then it is this sort of an assistant, or it sits there and it's helping people do their job versus trying to replace it. And that also leads to the other thing that a runtime article that we pulled out, and that is talking about learning to live with good enough AI. And it talks about how one of the things that's happening is that CIOs are starting to look at this and saying, "Hey, we actually don't need it to be perfect. We don't need it to be flawless." And again, this goes back to getting that use case right, because where is that true? Well, if I'm trying to actually replace an employee, if a customer is doing a complete interaction exclusively with an AI system, an agentic system, or whatever it is, then it almost does have to be flawless because the risks are very high, right? My cost of that failed customer experience is extremely high. So the cost of failure, the cost of an error is actually pretty significant. But if I do have that human in loop, if the AI is being predominantly consumed by an employee who's using it to make their job more effective, well, I've got a lot more tolerance, right? Because that human is the person that we're expecting to actually not just take whatever the AI spits out at face value and actually is applying some judgment to it and is using their expertise, the things that we pay them for to begin with, to figure out where this makes sense. And I think what is interesting is when you get that alignment, and this is sort of what this article in Runtime is talking about, and Tom Krazit always does a great job of sort of framing these, is that when you get that right, you start to realize that it doesn't have to be perfect. And now suddenly you can create that allowance for the fact that for the foreseeable future, Gen AI is going to continue to have some of these challenges with hallucinations or errant data, that you can now create a way to handle that because the human is the one that's processing it. And so I think it's an interesting kind of framing of how to look at it.
Yes, and providing a little bit of context, that is that Tom Krazit was commentating on a panel at the recent Human X conference, which was, of course, focused on the role of AI in the business world, as every conference seems to be now. But this idea that AI is always going to, that generative AI and related probabilistic AI tools are always going to make mistakes, as inevitably as you provide them with questions that don't necessarily have deterministic answers. I think that's actually fine. It's just a different way of thinking. We are making agents think more like people. And sometimes what you're looking for when you're talking to people or other voices or other viewpoints is a counter argument or something that is not fitting with your status quo expectations. And sometimes that ends up being wrong. But that doesn't necessarily mean that simply providing that perspective is bad. It just means that it needs to be expected, and you have to have an idea of what to do with the wrong feedback that you end up getting from something like an agent or a generative AI bot.